Yeah, thanks, Catherine. As Catherine said, I'm interested in values associated with small-scale energy and what that means for changes in the wider energy system. Where's the... as a bit of an outline, I'll spend a few minutes just giving the overall context on the energy challenge, or challenges as we have them defined. I'll talk a little bit about the growth of small-scale energy as an alternative to the kind of traditional large-scale technologies and institutions that we have in this country. That'll bring me on to research objectives, of which there are two main ones. I'll talk a little bit about REN, who are a community energy organisation in the north of Cornwall, who are my main case study. And I'll talk a little bit about progress so far. My thoughts are kind of evolving over the week, so feedback is of course welcome. So, three big energy challenges. Essentially, emission reduction targets I see anyway as an energy challenge. So 84% of total emissions can be associated in some way to the energy sector. So although it's a huge part of the problem in terms of reducing emissions, it's also potentially a large part of the solution. As you can see, energy by far makes up the biggest proportion of UK emissions. Secondly, we have a huge infrastructure gap. Ofgem estimate that we need to spend something in the region of between 100 and 200 billion in the next, well, this was written in 2009, I think, so within a decade. And to put that in context, so the black line is kind of historic annual investment. The lines on the right are different projections of investment in terms of meeting our energy goals. So huge variations in terms of annual spending. Largely variations resulting from different assumptions based on the kind of agreements we can come to globally, environmental agreements, and the speed at which we can come out of global economic recession. So all we really know is that there's a lot of money going to need to be spent in the next decade, and ultimately consumers or people are going to have to pay for it in some way. And the other big challenge is energy security, and this has traditionally been talked about as a supply issue, how to make the country as independent as possible. Increasingly it's been seen more as a demand issue, so going back to that last slide, we're not going to get to where we want to get to unless people are willing to pay the costs to invest in infrastructure, etc. One thing we do know is that the scale and immediacy of the challenge is unprecedented. We need to spend lots of money. We need to make huge decisions. There will be inevitable trade-offs. The real challenge is that the current system we have isn't set up for change very easily. So we have a political economic paradigm that relies on markets and expects the markets to take the best route, providing regulation is set in the right way. Regulation has been designed around large-scale fossil fuel and nuclear-based infrastructures, and regulation favours that norm. We have then lock-in to these technologies and institutions that are around them. Carsten Nuyhoff talks about an uneven playing field, and here he's talking about the system is unable to correct for externalities. So you might have negative costs associated with climate change from fossil fuel burning, or you might have positive externalities associated with community energy, perhaps. The current system isn't able to take these different things into account. I'm arguing in my thesis that we might need alternative frameworks to think about the values in which we think about energy. The fundamental thing is we can do it. I think if we want to. And I think it was Walt Patterson who made this point that these kind of institutions and paradigms are a construct. We built them, and we can change them if we wanted to. We know that there are several possible pathways. Several themes in these pathways are common. So we definitely need to decarbonise electricity, and Jess talked about that in terms of heat. People must play a greater role than they have. And building on that, a system-wide approach is necessary. So we need technologies, but we also need economic structure to bring these technologies in. We need some restructuring in society and institutions society builds. Again, large expensive decisions. It's a social issue rather than a technological issue, and there will be trade-offs. I'm interested in building an evidence base around small scale and understanding more what these trade-offs mean. So there's been quite large growth in small scale energy, and by that I mean the infrastructure as well as the actors and processes involved in deploying decentralized energy. So not just the little turbines, but also the community groups and the peoples that are involved in putting them on the ground. This has been coming from two directions. So if government feed-in tariff has provided people the opportunity to invest in and benefit from technologies. Also bottom-up transition groups and energy activism, so people who want to be more engaged with energy decisions, and they feel like they should be more engaged. There's a feeling that small scale is a nice thing. People are involved. There are environmental benefits. Small scale energy is usually based around renewables, so you don't have the external costs associated with fossil fuels. There might be some economic benefits. There might be social benefits in terms of people becoming energy citizens instead of consumers. There might be costs also. So bits of kit cost money, though these costs are diminishing as we go up the innovation chain. Clearly risks in terms of planning, siting, bits of infrastructure, and there might be limitations in terms of scaling these little projects up. Schumacher, talks a lot about the beauty of small scale, and he hits the nail on the head when he says, it depends on what we are trying to do. If we are trying to get energy at least cost, then probably small scale doesn't really matter. If we want a truly sustainable energy system, then probably it does. And to a degree, there's probably a balance there to be made. So moving on to my objectives. I want to try and think about how we can start to assess the value of small-scale energy, and what does that mean in terms of how we think about them, what is important in small scale. And through what kind of framework can this stuff be navigated and communicated to a wider audience. I'm working with Wadebridge Renewable Energy Network. They have quite ambitious targets to provide 30% of electricity from renewable sources by 2015, so just around the corner, and I think 100% by 2020, so far exceeding national targets. I want to try and assess the values associated with REN. So do groups like REN, and there are lots of other groups in the southwest and beyond, do they add value in terms of helping to address energy challenges? So they help to get things on the ground, but are there other benefits that they bring along? And this is relatively understudied. Not many objective empirical studies on the value of such approaches. And I think there's a real gap there. I think we need to know how important these things are, and we can perhaps build an argument for further support if there is a strong argument for them. Methods, both desk and field based. There's lots of data out there. DEC published quite a lot of data on renewable deployment, on energy consumption at quite a small scale. I'm piloting a social survey which will hopefully try and capture attitudes towards an energy transition in the town of Wadebridge. And I'm moving on to do an economic impact analysis. So what is the impact of the kind of things Wren are doing on the local Cornish economy. I'll then move on to try and establish ways of thinking about these kind of things. So if we have economic as well as social as well as environmental impact, how do we start to put these on the same piece of paper and communicate these to policymakers? Is there a way that these can be thought about in monetary as well as non-monetary ways? And moving on, and I'm not going to talk much about the last point, but I want to try and build narratives around the data I'm collecting. So what does that data mean in the context? Can we talk about the data as well as movements in the policy arena and try to make sense about what's happening in towns like Wadebridge? I spent the last few months establishing a baseline, and this is ongoing really, and I'm trying to build up a picture essentially of where Wadebridge is in terms of their energy economy. So this is looking at the resources that people consume, types and quantities, economic aspects of these consumption patterns, social aspects, so how engaged people are, and then environmental and a contextual set of indicators. The idea is that these indicators speak to policy objectives more generally. So if we're looking, if one of our objectives in energy policy is for supply to meet demand, or more simply, people accessing energy, what do we really mean by that? Well, we really mean that we want affordable energy, and then you can start to pick that apart. So we want affordable energy for all incomes. So we try to target the fuel poor, for example, and all building types. So you can quite quickly get quite deep and geeky about the kinds of houses people live in and the kind of incomes and lifestyles that they're on, and you can perhaps build up a picture of the kind of barriers and opportunities to moving forward in terms of reducing energy poverty, for example. Just a few illustrative pictures here, and this is the kind of things that will be talked about in my baseline. So you can build up pictures of proportion of households on mains gas, for example. And so the top left here, this is houses not on mains gas. So this second bar is the area surrounding Wadebridge, so the red area, and hardly anyone is on mains gas, so 94% or so of houses are not on mains gas, which is a barrier perhaps to heating the house more effectively than they should be able to. You can build up pictures of installed PV capacity in the area, and you can look at consumption patterns at quite a small scale. So you can just build up a picture of what's going on, and then perhaps what's the potential for further change. This is what I'm working on just now, and because there's not much been done on this, this has become quite a methodological part. So I'm thinking about these things with not a lot of literature to build on, unfortunately. One of the first things I need to do is define scope of the question. So we know that I want to find the economic impact of small-scale energy, but at what scale? Are we thinking about Wadebridge as a locality, the impact of the area surrounding Wadebridge, or should we be thinking more in regional terms, impact on Cornwall or the southwest, perhaps? So these are the kind of questions I'm grappling with. I'll then move on to building a conceptual model around how we can capture economic impact, build a picture of stakeholders, and this will hopefully move on to a business survey and eventual impact analysis. Ultimately, going back to my research questions, does small scale offer added value? And moving on from that, is added value important? So this is all very nice, and it's nice to know how important and valuable small scale is, but we need to find out, I think, well, who cares? Is it of interest to local authorities? Is it more of interest to at a national level? Even if it is of interest, will evidence make any difference? There's a feeling, I guess, that energy decisions are very political, and these kind of small scale evidence bases might not make that much difference. But that's one of the kind of questions that I'm hoping to address as I move on. I think that's me. Thank you very much. I think they can play a role. Whether or not we want that is then it suddenly becomes something large scale if resources are in the hands of the big six. And there's questions there about trust. If you're moving something that's very local and owned by a small collection of people, if you're moving some of the capacity into the hands of the big six, then perhaps you're moving away from the whole point of the system. But yeah, I do agree that there's potentially a role there. They have massive resources. There's an issue, I guess, with what they want to do. Their objectives as big companies is to make profit, and they're going to need to see healthy figures on the bottom line if they're going to do something that's good for society. So yeah, potentially there is a role, but I'm not sure how.
To sort of follow on from that, there's been a big debate in where I live, in May, Burnhouse, over the last 6 months or so, where we're not terribly worried about the big six energy companies coming in and doing things, but there's been there's a plan, and it's gone through now, to put a solar farm on the other side of May, and it's going to cover 11 fields, 20 acres or so. And this would normally be seen, I guess, by you. I imagine there's been a small scale system. I don't know if you would or not, but it's a smallish scale system. But it's not run by anyone in the local area. It's run by a company up in London who see this as an investment, effectively. And so they've driven roughshod over the feelings of the people in the local community, to the extent that when they had they said they'd sent out letters to everybody in the local area saying, come to a public meeting. And of course there were only 4 letters sent out to everybody in May. There's about 1,000 people in May. And so when no one turned up at the local meeting, they then said, well, nobody was interested, so we've gone ahead. And they used that specifically to effectively pull the wool over the planet's eyes.
Sure.
Now, this seems that this sort of doesn't fall into the stool between the large, the very large companies, but equally it's not. It's about renewable energy, but it's sort of somewhere between the two. I mean, is that something which is clearly something like this happening elsewhere?
Yeah. I mean, one of the very first things I grappled with in my first year was defining small scale, and lots of discussion in the literature about what is community energy, what is decentralized energy, how do you put boundaries around small scale, and when does it become large, etc. I've tried to move away from that debate a little bit by talking about small scale energy. So moving away from a megawatt description and talking more about the involvement of people. So my definition tries not to tries to imply involvement of a local community.
But yeah, I can see that. But the problem is that to the people who are involved in these, living in these sorts of places where these sorts of things are happening, that they don't really see the difference between large scale and small scale. They just see this in being imposed on them.
Yeah.
And there's no community tie-in either.
Yeah.
This is clearly something that's not just happening in May, it's happening.
Sure, and that's it's very interesting to hear about. I mean, I think one of the points of my research is to try and capture these kind of dynamics. So you would expect a town that is engaged in terms of having energy transition and energy on their doorstep, and being involved in owning and managing it. You would expect that kind of stuff to come through in my study. So and conversely, your example there would pick up different elements there. So so you might have a huge resource for the size of community, but you wouldn't have participation and buy-in from the local community. So that's straight away a barrier to to moving forward, perhaps. I didn't talk about this, but I'm just going to eventually move on to trying to think about how technology, economics, society, and policy are linked in. So, for example, technologies might be available and established and cheap, but you aren't going to get very far towards moving to a sustainable energy system if society isn't engaged and involved, or if policy isn't heading in the right direction. So it would be very interesting to hear more about that, actually.
Is it the farmer that's making money then?
Yeah, Guy Stivians owns the land. He's making the money. The company up in London, it's Light, what's it called? Light Source or Light something. Anyway, a big company up in the city has put its money, which went in, it's gone in now, because it won by one vote. But we don't have a problem with this, but we're not accept that we're not making anything out of it. In a sense, there's no one's having their emissions reduced, no one's having their electricity reduced. It's the imposition on a green, effectively green belt. It's 11 fields being ploughed up. And this is not just a May thing.
Sure. No.
Smith.
Yeah.
There's another one between here and Helston coming up. So this is clearly a big move, I think, by certain sectors to impose these very large solar farms with no local buy-in. And that sort of doesn't fit your model in the sense that everyone's happy with solar panels. I think as long as the community is properly involved.
Sure.
And that works very well there.
So with kind of social value, I don't know what you're looking at because Are you putting a financial value on?
No, I'm trying to avoid that at all costs, really. I think the project was born out of that to a degree. It was born out of a desire to try and think about these things in one tidy framework. And you could arguably, to do a social cost-benefit analysis, incorporating social as well as environmental aspects, such as ability to heat your home, and attach a monetary value to it, and stick it in a balance sheet, and find out if it's worthwhile or not. But it's massively open to criticism, and I think ultimately, we shouldn't try and shoehorn whatever we're trying to do into neoclassical economic framework, and I'm trying to argue that there are perhaps other more effective ways of thinking about sustainability, and that's part of that might be an economic argument, but there's a lot of it that shouldn't be thought about in these terms, I don't think.
Okay, move on to the next one. Mr. Tom. So this Tom's followed on very nicely from Iain